So if you're a rugby player, you should have a game day routine. Something that allows you to be at the very best you can be in a state of physical readiness where you feel amazing and you feel good to go when it's time to play the game. Now in this video, we're going to talk about the use of a primer session in the morning to understand if that can give you the edge in competition in the afternoon. Now a primer session is typically a high intensity, low in volume training session that tapers you into a state of readiness. This can be done the day before a game and also the morning of a game. But is it just part of the training week, the training block, the training year, or is it an acute effect that can actually make a difference to your performance? Guys, that's what we're talking about in this video, and as ever, I'm here to give you clarity on the topic. Hey guys, I'm Fraser, strength and conditioning coach for the Biella Bears. You can find me at rugbystrengthandconditioning.com. Today, I'm talking about primers because I actually did my master's thesis on the topic. It was something that I really wanted to explore and really wanted to get to the bottom of. If it was going to help my team perform better in the afternoon, then that's absolutely something that I wanted the guys to do. So this past season, we actually looked at primers on game day, and this is what I discovered. In short, we discovered there's a zone of intensities that you want to be operating in if you're going to be bringing in primers during game day. Now let's take a deep dive into the details to understand if it's something that you want to bring in, a strategy that you might consider using this season, because it could very well be something that works extremely well for you, or it might be something you want to avoid, and there are a couple of things that you need to know before we get into this. Let's have a look at the research. Let's go. So strength and conditioning coaches have a plan for the year and the months and the weeks to build into the competitive season and put people in the best place possible to perform well during competition. Now there's an acute strategy, priming sessions, which can help performance and has been shown in the research under various circumstances, and that's something that we need to talk about now because it's not as black and white as you might think. So before I talk about exactly what we did here at Biella Rugby Club during a game day, let's talk a little bit about the background of how primer sessions actually work and the underlying mechanisms behind the primer session. Now it goes without saying that sporting performance is subject to both intrinsic and extrinsic factors, and the circadian rhythm is known to play an important role in performance markers, with changes in force expression being observed throughout the day. And this is due to a number of factors. Now, testosterone levels correlate with athletic performance, particularly in elite athletes. Throughout the waking day, we have a natural decline in our testosterone levels. Absolutely normal, absolutely natural. We operate within a range, just with a lot of other things in our body. And there's an idea in the research that's been shown in the research that morning exercise can actually offset slightly this decline. Imagine if you have a morning protocol that can offset the decline of testosterone, which we've already said is important for athletic performance markers, then that's going to give you a little bit of an advantage and in theory put you in a good state to play at your best on game day if you're playing in the afternoon. So this is one of the underlying ideas of doing a primer on game day that isn't talked about much on social media, is the influence that it could potentially have on hormone levels. Now it would have been amazing if I controlled for that in my research. Unfortunately, due to budget constraints and also me running everything, there's no way that I was going to be able to test the players' hormone levels, etc. on game day, but it is something I wanted to highlight to you. Now, like I said, there's so many other factors to consider: sleep, what's going on in your life outside, which can affect hormone levels. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. So let's keep exploring why primer sessions might actually help and make a difference to your afternoon performance. So another underlying idea of the reason why we might want to include primers is to stimulate the central nervous system. So waking the body up, so to speak, so the first activity you do of the day isn't the most important of the day in the afternoon because you've already done something to get the central nervous system firing and it's primed and ready to go in the afternoon. So let's look at modality, sets and reps of primer sessions in the research first, and also timing, because that's really important. So for example, there were researchers working with rugby players who did banded bench presses and banded back squats 2.5 hours before a simulated kickoff time. So they tested 2.5 hours after, and they weren't checking rugby performance. We'll talk about that in a second, but they were checking for power output. They noticed that upper body power output was up, and that was good. However, they noticed that lower body power output was down, which is a no-go for rugby players. So in rugby, we need fresh legs. Strong, powerful legs are associated with line breaks, which is obviously a KPI for rugby players, is really important. If you can break the line, awesome, keep the ball alive. So what we don't want to do is any protocol that sort of takes away from that. So take away from that is doing a session 2.5 hours before kickoff would seem like a bad idea if you're going to do banded back squats and banded bench presses. And I'll just say my 2 cents on that as well. Like, what you don't want is just a really long extended warm up. Okay, that is not what you want. So you want to have a primer session if you're going to use it. After this video, you'll know if you want to or not. And then you want to have a nice big break, and then whatever, you're eating, etc. And then you go into an actual rugby warm-up. So we know that doing primer sessions 2.5 hours before simulated competition or tests isn't a good idea. It doesn't have a positive effect that we would like, especially for the legs. However, there are other research that's looked at both rugby players and football players, suggesting that primer sessions between 4 and 6 hours before simulated competition can have a positive effect on physical performance. Now, I'm choosing my words carefully here. I'm saying physical performance because, again, we're not talking about rugby performance yet, but we'll get there and I'll explain why in a second. Performance isn't just a physical thing, there's also that psychology. So I'm not a psychologist by any means, but I've looked at the primer research, and in certain populations you could say that primer sessions affect the psychology, and therefore having some sort of way to assess and understand someone's mood and state would be an important thing to include in primer research. And that's exactly what we did last season. Just to understand that part of it, we actually brought in a POMS questionnaire in the morning and the afternoon to understand the guy's mood and state, as well as obviously controlling for the physiological tests. So when it comes to primer research, the bulk of it is done during simulated competition. I couldn't actually find research that was published that was looking at primer sessions on the day of a rugby game that mattered. So there was simulated competitions, but I couldn't find it. Maybe it does exist. If you are a researcher and you just happen to be watching this video, please do comment in the comment section because I'd love to continue exploring it. But it's suffice to say that psychology is going to play a big role in that. So if you know you're coming in the morning and you're doing a primer session and then you're chilling out and later on you're just doing some tests, that might affect your psychology. Whereas if you are coming in and doing a primer session in the morning and you've got a big league game in the afternoon, you might score differently on the old POMS form than you would if it was just a simulated competition. Okay, so the point here is that psychology and physiology are obviously going to affect performance. And I'll comment on the psychology in this video, but obviously I'm focusing more on the physiology. So looking at all of the primer research, and I've looked at over 100 studies, okay, I've only mentioned 2 or 3 so far, but there was no agreed upon protocol that can help rugby players like 6 hours before. Yes, there was a suggestion of a window and timing. Yes, there was a couple of key principles that were standing out, like intensity and low volume. However, there were some protocols that were really aggressive and high volume. And it was like, okay, well, what can I actually work with on game day? So there was one protocol that did 5 sets of 10 reps at 75% of your max, and that's not something you can do before a game day. Sure, your body will get a stimulus out of that and there will be some sort of hormonal response because that's a lot of volume. 75% for 10 reps for most people is a 10 RM. So you need to build up to that, and you might close out the 5th set. I don't know, I'd like to see that in action. We use that in our hypertrophy programming. We certainly would not use it before a game. Anyway, I looked at all the research and I thought that, okay, priming, there might be something here, let's explore it. I know the window is going to be around that 4 to 6 hours if I'm using it on game day, but the protocols, let's explore that. So let me run you through exactly what happened. Kickoff time was at 2:30 in the afternoon. The guys came into the club at 9:20, where they completed a POMS form in the changing room. From there, they either went on to no activity, so the control group, or they went into their sprints or their weights or their mixed protocol. Now at 9:30, we started a group warm-up. So I was doing the warm-up with the sprint, the weights and the mixed group, and we all did the same 10-minute warm-up. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the guys completed another questionnaire, another POMS questionnaire, and we went through our performance tests. At 2 o'clock, the rugby specific warm-up started. So at 1:55, we ran through the timing gates, 10 and 30 meter accelerations. Didn't use GPS data, we actually ran through the gates on grass to look at people's best efforts on the speed. So guys, we didn't just look at one game day, we did this over 4 game days, all right? So it was over a month, and we started with 25 guys, but because some people were involved and then not involved, actually we were looking at 17. So gathered data on 25, but there were 17 players that I could actually use the data fairly and assess whether primers were working or not, and which protocol was more effective or effective at all. Now there's a couple of things that had to happen for them to be included in the research, and that was that they were CIAO rugby players, they were free from injury, and they were also experienced with strength and conditioning to the point where there was nothing new coming at them. So that's really important, that they were familiar with all the exercises that I was asking of them, and they weren't beginners, so they had at least 3 years of strength and conditioning experience here at Biella Rugby Club. Okay, so let's talk about each group. So the control group came in just like everybody else at 9:20. They did their POMS form, and then they went off to the clubhouse to sit and chill and play some chess and whatnot and just relax in a room quietly. The sprint group came in at 9:20. They went up to the Tenzo where we train 9:30. We did the warm up, and then they followed this protocol that I'm putting up here. So 3 max effort sprints, and that's important. We used the gates and we gave them feedback to make sure that they were actually sprinting, or I should say accelerations, excuse me, because it was only 10 meters. So 10 meter accelerations, 3 max efforts with 120 seconds rest. The weights group just had to build up to a heavy 3 at 80% on 2 exercises. So bench press and trap bar deadlift. Now this is quite conservative loading strategies. I'll talk about the limitations of this study and my rationale as to why I chose 3s and 80% over other things, okay? So we'll get into that in a second. And the mixed group followed this protocol here, trap bar into 10 meters, into bench press, into medicine ball throw. And those are the protocols that we used. We didn't bring in any Olympic lift, although I've got guys that are proficient on that. I've got some guys that we don't use Olympic lifting for. So I wanted to keep everything even, so to speak, and really explore these protocols. So as I was gathering the data over the 4 games over the month, I was seeing some interesting things. At the end, I used SPSS software and ran a repeated measures ANOVA to understand what was statistically significant and what was not. Drum roll for the results. So statistically speaking, we actually didn't find anything that was significantly different. So between the control, the sprint, the weights, the mixed group, there was no primer session there that allowed them to get in a state of physical performance based on the metrics that we looked at and perform better on the metrics that we looked at. That was a waste of time, boys, sorry about that. Awkward. So guys, you've got the answer, but before you go, let's understand actually why we didn't see any results, and also why that informs the program as well. So it's something that's really useful to understand, because now we know what not to do. Sometimes we're always looking for the next big thing that's going to make a huge difference, but in order to understand what's going to make a big difference and give us an edge in competition, we have to kind of get rid of the stuff that some people think are going to work and do make a huge difference. We're like, mate, you're wasting your time with that, let's try this instead. And then, you know, that's the research process. So between the control group and the other groups, we didn't see any statistical significance. But what I did notice on an individual level is that some guys responded a lot better to the acceleration protocol in the morning than to the other stuff. Now, it wasn't statistically significant, there weren't enough people to say. However, individually, you started to notice little patterns, and that might form a bit of guidance and more exploration when it comes to certain individuals and asking about, should I do this, should I do that? You respond quite well to this, let's consider exploring this. So this whole process kind of allowed us to dismiss certain things, but also to have more questions and more areas to explore, which is the nature of research, I suppose, so all good. The other thing that was really interesting is we use GPS, but we've never ran 30 meter max effort sprints before a game individually. So we did this individually, and that's really important to say. In the past, we've done like, okay guys, before we go into the changing room, max effort to the 22 or the 30 or the 50, and you know, you see the GPS, you can see without the GPS data that some guys you know, are running max effort and some guys are not, and that's due to the psychology and people knowing their bodies and getting themselves ready for what they need to do in the game. That's fine, but in this research we did it individually so I could really control and check and through the timing gates. And the cool thing to see was that people were they were either hitting their PB or they were within 2%, and we were running on grass. All right, normally we test on a synthetic pitch, so it's a little bit faster, okay? So that suggests that something's going right with the program. Lascia stare, leave the primer research aside, something within our week is working well. We're tapering into the week so that guys are at a physical state and then they're at their fastest. So that was important information to feed back to the coaches, and the coaches were obviously there at game day. So they were really happy to hear that, and I was happy to see that something was going right within a week, which you kind of hope for, but it's just nice to have. You wouldn't hope for, you plan for, but it's nice to have the numbers to really back it up. So guys, why did my research come back negative? I'm looking at it positively because now I know what not to do, but also why did it come back without any real results, whereas other research has come back with or mixed results or positive results? For example, there's a protocol with rugby players, again, on simulated competition, where they performed 5 40-metre max effort sprints with a quick turnaround. They found a significant difference in afternoon performance of a one-off max effort 40-metre sprint time. So that suggests, oh, well, if we do 40-metre sprinting 5 times in the morning with a quick turnaround, actually we'll be faster in the afternoon. I can't do that on a game day. High-speed running comes at a risk to hamstring health, potentially. But there's just no reason to get people going through a robust warm-up, which you'd have to do to run like high-speed max velocity running 40 metres, and then perform 5 40 metres, and then test them. And I just wasn't willing to go through that. I was willing to do max effort accelerations where there's zero chance or almost zero chance of any hamstring pulls, because you're just in that acceleration, you're not even able to open up. Whereas high-speed running, max effort velocity, you're just increasing that chance. And the first rule of S&C is to just mitigate against all risks, which leads me on to why I was using 80% for 3 on the strength protocol. So 70% for 3 and 75% for 3 just don't count. They just don't count. They were just warming up, and I thought that 80%, based on research, if you're hitting 80%, remember this is a maintenance period, the competition period, so a maintenance period of strength training, that's going to be enough to maintain your strength, all right? Now that 80%, everybody's different, okay? But at 80% for 3 reps, you've probably got between 3 to 5 reps, depending on the person, in the tank. All right, so if I give you 80%, there'll be some people that might get, there'll be some people, slow twitch guys, that might get 8, more likely 6 or 7 if you're going max effort. So, you're saving 3 in the tank, let's say. So we weren't going to a point where we were really pushing, which is maybe why we didn't get a training response. Okay, our body was like, yeah, we can do this, but it's not an intensity in which I actually need to, adapt. So the stimulus there might just not have been enough to create a training response, which then affects the decline of testosterone or the underlying mechanisms of what we're looking for. Now, a way around that, because the other research has shown that weights do actually make a difference, but they're using like 3 RMs, which you'd be up at like 90% for most people. Some people 92.5, some people really fast twitch guys 87.5. So it's depending on the person, but suffice to say, our 80% for 3 reps wasn't at the intensity to have a positive response and affect results. However, other research has had, but they've operated up at 90%, which suggests to me there might be a threshold somewhere between 80 for 3 and your 3 RM, 90 for 3, that you can operate in without maxing out. Again, during the day of a rugby game, I didn't want my players to max out. We're not talking about guys that are lifting 100 kilograms on the trap bar here. We're talking about 9:30 in the morning, you've got scrums to do at whatever time, 3 o'clock, 2:35, whenever the first scrum of the game is, and you're asking guys, okay, let's go to 90%, so that's 250 kilograms at 9:30 in the morning, 250 kilograms at 9:30 in the morning. I'm not gonna ask my guys to do that, so 80% just seemed a little bit more forgiving. We're still having to load up 200 plus. So that was part of the reason why I was conservative with the loadings, because I was trying to get the performance with 80%, one set, 80% for 3 reps, which research suggests that you can maintain strength, but it just wasn't enough to spike a response that we were looking for. So again, if I was to do this all again with weights, which I'm not sure I would, I would increase the intensity, all right? But again, you're always having this battle of mitigating against risk and maximizing performance. And for me, I was conservative there because it's the first time we're doing, but really useful information to know that if I'm going to do a primer or I'm going to implement primer sessions, I won't be using 80%, and I might explore other things which we'll talk about now. What we could explore is speed strength, jumps, cleans, snatches, etc., which we didn't do. That's another protocol that we could look at and might want to explore, and you might want to explore. Another thing that would be super useful if you're using strength lifts or if you're using power lifts is to have a power measure. So using a velocity-based device will be amazing for this type of research. We didn't have one at that time. We do now, and it's something that I would definitely implement. One, same thing as having the guys run through the gates for 10-meter accelerations. That instant feedback is going to make sure that people are putting as much intent into it as possible. As I mentioned, with 70% for 3, guys can lift that for 10 reps, multiple sets, 15 reps if we're maxing out, all right? I was just asking them to do it for 3 because it was just like step-by-step warming up. Probably the intent, the max intent wasn't there. Now, had I clicked up some sort of velocity-based device, we'd start to see full intent, and I'd give the numbers back and say, hey, you need to be at this velocity for this percentage and this. And then that intent might affect the training, the response to training, okay? So it's definitely something I would suggest including if you're exploring primers. Get a velocity-based device, link up and understand your numbers, and intent behind every rep would be crucial. So guys, I promised we'd talk about some of the limitations in this study. I'll talk about one of the main limitations, and that is I'm looking at rugby players, but I'm not looking at rugby performance. Much like a lot of the literature in primer research, rugby performance is positional specific. There's KPIs for different roles, all right? And that can be affected by the environment, by the pitch you're playing on, by the weather, by the team that you're playing, okay? Whether it's the top or the bottom. So it becomes quite hard to crunch the numbers when you're talking about rugby performance in this particular type of setting. So the first thing I wanted to do was explore physical performance based on the metrics and the tests that we ran. Now, there'd be other tests that I would do, but there was equipment limitations, etc. So that's what we did, and that's why we did it. Would it be really cool to then run regression models and look at rugby performance and organize that? Yes. Is that a project I would like to do in the future? Yes. Will it be in the foreseeable future? No. I'm going to leave primers where they are, talk to people on an individual level, and explore, of course, the more power-based exercises, linking up with velocity-based training. Guys, if you're interested in velocity-based training and you're not really sure what it's all about, here's a guide here you can check out. It'll run you through everything you need to know. Have a look if you're interested in velocity-based training. So main takeaways from this video would be, if you're going to do primers, use some sort of velocity-based device to track what you're doing sets and reps. Make sure you're not doing this right before you go out into a warm-up. That's just a warm-up, okay? Do it at least 4 hours before you go into competition. And if you're going to do strength activities, save 1 in the tank. Don't save 3+ in the tank. Only do movements that you're super familiar with. You don't want to have any soreness after you train. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that I have provided clarity to you on this issue. If you liked it, please do consider subscribing, because we've got more content like this on the channel. Give the video a thumbs up because I really appreciate that. And you might want to consider checking out one of 2 of these videos where we've got velocity-based training and we've got my best strength exercises for rugby. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.